Hello again, my little ghouls and goblins. In the movies, the good guys always catch the crooks, save the day, and there's a post-credit scene hyping up a character you've never heard of before. Well, life isn't always like the movies, and more often than not, the bad guys slip away. I'm Taylor, your casual crypt keeper, and today we're gonna list off top 5 evil people who were never caught. Shout out down below which of these terrifying crooks freaks you out the most. Let's dive on in. Number 5, Frank Mathews. Our first spot is notorious criminal kingpin Frank Mathews, a legendary crime lord operating out of New York in the 1960s, who also had some pretty cool classic mafia names like Pee-wee and Black Caesar. Built himself a criminal empire that Los Pollos Hermanos would have been jealous of. Starting out small, working in racketeering and illegal gambling ops in Philly in the 1960s, he had his sights set on much bigger things, working his way up, collecting numbers, making contacts, until he could start selling product for some serious money. By the early 1970s, he was already trading millions of dollars for illegal narcotics, importing his stuff from Latin America and distributing it throughout the States. Pee-wee had his hands and pockets across the country, with his criminal web spanning across 21 states at its peak. Naturally, if you're moving that much stuff around the country with that many people involved in your operation, eventually somebody's gonna get wise. And that's exactly what happened. Boys in Blue tapped Frankie's phone communications and put out a federal bulletin for his arrest. By December 1972, Frank and his girlfriend were arrested at McCarran International in Vegas. Okay, so he got caught. This kind of breaks the list a little bit, but hear me out a little bit here. Because after spending a paltry couple months in jail, Frankie made bail and quickly got out of Dodge to literally never be seen again. Now, there is some discrepancy as to what happened. The FBI suspects that he was taken care of by a major New York crime family for fears he may turn witness. But they did also post a bounty, a $200,000 bounty for finding him, so they suspected he might still be out there. No trace of him was ever found, no body ever discovered, and his story went cold. Is he sleeping with the fishes, or did he return to pull strings from the shadows? Or maybe he pulled a Saul Goodman and started managing a Cinnabon in Omaha, living life on the lam. Man, that's 2 Breaking Bad references in 1 point. I gotta spread them out a little bit more. We got lots more than awkwardly wedging in Breaking Bad references on Top 5 Scary. We've got the best horror content on the web at least twice a day, every day, so hit subscribe and stay spooked. Number 4, the Pickler. You know, at first glance, this is not a particularly threatening nickname. It kind of sounds like the absolute lamest Z-tier excuse for a Batman villain that you'd throw in as a warm-up before, fighting the actual cool villain of that issue. Well, names can often be so deceiving because there really is not a lot that's funny about the Pickler once you understand why they called him that. He's maybe one of the most bizarre and macabre criminals I've ever read about. The Hungarian Bela Kiss lived in a small village near Budapest in the early 20th century. He lived with an elderly maid, but otherwise kept to himself. Didn't have a tight circle of friends, but he did enjoy frequent female company. I mean, of course, with a name like Bela Kiss. Makes sense. I gotta stop trying to make this guy sound cute because I'm gonna regret it in like 1 second. In 1914, during the height of the First World War, Bela left to fight with his country. Now, wartime sometimes necessitates borrowing resources wherever you can, and the Hungarian army was short on gas. On Bela's isolated property were dozens upon dozens of oil barrels all conspicuously laid out in his yard. Someone alerted the soldiers and they went to go borrow a cup or two, and were shocked to discover that upon cracking open the barrels were the bodies of several women floating in alcohol in a depraved attempt to preserve the corpses. Hence where the foul nickname the Pickler came from. See, it's not nearly as funny once you know why they call him that. 20 barrels, 20 missing women. That's somehow not even the scariest, craziest part of this whole story. The women had punctures in their necks and were drained of blood, which sounds completely made up that this guy might also have been a vampire. Now, the Hungarian army moved to seize Bela immediately, but tracking him proved rather difficult, as he had a fairly common name and was also, he was in a war. Somehow, Bela was alerted that police had discovered his operation, and he left a corpse posing as himself in a military hospital and fled, never to be found again. Reported sightings popped up for a few years here and there. Allegedly, he moved to New York to begin a new life, but Bela eluded capture for the rest of his life. Unless he really was a vampire and is still out there, but I don't even want to entertain that possibility. Number 3, D.B.Cooper. Now, our next entry, I would hesitate to call him as evil as the rest of some of these crooks, Sure, he hijacked a plane, sure, he held the entire plane hostage, and sure, he stole $200,000 from the government, but that doesn't mean he's a bad guy. D.B. Cooper's case is one of contempt contemporary crime legends, as all that I just described sounds like he would be FBI public enemy number 1, right? Like they'd be working around the clock to bust this guy. They'd have him within the week. He slipped through authorities' fingers, and to date, D.B.Cooper was never caught. We don't know if that was even his real name or just an epithet he was using for the plane. We don't know anything really too concrete about him. Depending on what your definition of success is, D.B.Cooper could possibly be considered one of the most successful criminals of all time. To get into the nitty-gritty of the details, on November 24th, 1971, a man using the possible alias Dan Cooper boarded a flight to Seattle, and almost as soon as it took off, he passed a note to a flight attendant indicating that he had a with him, and that he demanded that when the plane landed, he trade the passengers on the flight for $200,000 and 2 parachutes. That's a smart man. He didn't want to waste any of that money on parachutes. The note said that if anything funny happened, he would blow the plane up. They complied out of fear, and upon landing, he was given the money by local authorities. Cooper then seized the plane one more time, holding the flight crew hostage with plans to fly to Mexico City. But midway through the flight, Cooper pulled a little point break and jumped out of the plane with all the money with him. And that would be the last time anyone would have ever seen D.B. Cooper. The FBI chased him for years to no avail. Nothing was ever found. No body ever recovered. No suspect ever caught out of a laundry list of people of interest. Some of the bills were recovered, but that's the only piece of evidence. Now, my absolute favorite theory about D.B. Cooper, and it's kinda out there, is that he's legendary cinema director Tommy Wiseau, and that this is where his fortune came from, as the man is shrouded in mystery regarding where his seemingly limitless supply of money comes from and his mysterious origins. Is it completely ridiculous and has no basis in reality? Yes, but it's also hilarious. Now, as for any more likely suspects for Cooper, there were a couple of Special Forces veterans who lined up with physical descriptions who could have been capable of committing the heist, but no concrete charges were ever made, and to date, no trace was ever found. Number 2, the Zodiac. Possibly one of the most infamous cases in American history, the Zodiac was a notorious criminal, famed in equal measures for his slayings and for his chilling obsession and interaction with the police trying to track him. He was made a household name after a Hollywood flick starring Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. depicting the efforts trying to find him. The Zodiac is known to be responsible for 5 different deaths terrorizing California in the late 60s and early 70s, although he himself claims responsibility for 37 victims. The Zodiac case became legend when he sent his now infamous letters to 3 separate newspapers, providing details only he could have known about the crimes, and challenging the police to a sick game of sorts, sending them incomprehensible ciphers and riddles that supposedly contain clues to his identity and the crimes within. Only one of his ciphers was ever solved, and the rest remain a mystery. The Riddler from the new Batman movie is a direct inspiration from the Zodiac's sinister dealings. For 5 years, the Zodiac would taunt his pursuers with riddles and codes, sending horrifying cards, taunts, a letter boldly displaying "My name is blank," and then a cipher below it teasing their inability to find him. A postcard with his symbol written in blood, amongst others. Part of what makes the Zodiac such a fascinating and truly horrifying case is how much he seems like a movie bad guy come to life. The planning makes him out to be some sort of sinister criminal mastermind, and it's hard to disagree with that proclamation when he's completely eluded any form of capture for the better part of 50 years. There were several possible suspects as to who the Zodiac could have been, but nothing conclusive. To date, people are still trying to find the answer, hoping something new might come up to put that nightmare to rest. Number 1, Jack the Ripper. If you want to talk about evil that's got some staying power, it's hard to top Whitechapel's most infamous resident ever. 134 years avoiding capture, which means he could still be out there. The 18th century Night Stalker has held an almost supernatural-like grip over public interest since we first ever heard about the case, surrounding the brutal 5 slayings we know about, who knows how many more. Preying on women and using the cover of the night, Jack eluded, stupefied, and taunted the streets of London, leaving a disgusting trail of blood and gore in his wake, leaving victims looking like the aftermath of a butcher's. He seemed to take a sickening glee in his violent delights, mocking his would-be pursuers, sending the police threatening letters, and even organs from his crimes. Jack is an almost modern mythical boogeyman, appearing across hundreds upon hundreds of works of fiction, TV shows, movies, video games, you name it. Assassin's Creed even tried to say he was part of the Order. That's a little out there. There are some folk who offer that Jack the Ripper is the progenitor to all true crime fascination, which honestly kinda makes sense. As much as he terrified Londoners at the time, the media was obsessed with him, with the original media buzz surrounding him, paralleling how we talk about most brutal crimes these days. You can bet your bottom pounds that if Jack was terrorizing London today, there'd be podcasters talking about him in between sponsored ads for MeUndies. Jack's crimes shocked Londoners, as the vicious and public nature of the slayings were not exactly commonplace. So surely, in 130 years, someone had to have some idea as to who Mr. the Ripper was, right? Well, with a case as famous as this, obviously there are some options. A quick glance at Jack's Wikipedia page suggests a possible 31 different suspects over the years who've all been attributed to it. And those are just the ones who made the page. It's worth noting that we are still looking. We are still trying to find him. Put this case to rest. Because everyone wants to be the one to say they unmasked the Ripper. That's all for this video, my little ghouls and goblins. I hope you enjoyed. Creep on creeping on, and I'll see you in the next one.